You go to bed tonight. You pull up your blanket, you scroll your phone for 40 minutes watching videos of dogs failing to catch frisbees, and eventually, after 3 trips to the kitchen for no reason, you fall asleep. Simple, comfortable, honestly, kind of beautiful. Now imagine doing all of that, minus the blanket, minus the phone, minus the bed, minus the walls, minus the kitchen, minus literally everything. And instead you're sitting in a dark forest wrapped in animal skin, listening to something large moving in the bushes 20 feet away from you. That was Tuesday for our ancestors. And here's the thing that nobody really asks. What did they actually do at night? Like when the sun went down, when the world went completely black, when predators started waking up, and your only tool was a sharp rock and a vague sense of optimism? What was the plan? Did they sleep? Did they stay awake? Did they just sit there staring into the void, mentally preparing for the worst, like a prehistoric version of someone waiting for their IKEA furniture to arrive? Because we spend a third of our entire lives asleep. And we rarely stop to think about how radically different that experience was for 99% of human history. The answer, as it turns out, is so much weirder, so much more fascinating, and honestly so much more human than you'd ever expect. Let's go back, way back. Before we had fire under control, before we had tools worth bragging about, before we had anything resembling civilization, early humans were dealing with a very simple and very terrifying problem. Half of every single day was in complete darkness. Not, the streetlights outside are annoyingly bright through my curtains, darkness. Not, I forgot to charge my phone and now I can't find the bathroom, darkness. Full, absolute, crushing, existential darkness. The kind where you hold your hand in front of your face and you see nothing. The kind where every snapped twig becomes a potential eulogy. And in that darkness, things hunted. Lions, hyenas, leopards, saber-toothed cats. Almost all the major predators of the ancient world are crepuscular or nocturnal. They're most active at dawn, dusk, and during the night, which means that when the sun went down, early humans went from being the ones doing the hunting to suddenly becoming a reasonably nutritious snack option for something with much better night vision. You didn't need a weather app to know the forecast. The forecast was dark with a high chance of being eaten. So what did you do? You grouped up. You got somewhere high, somewhere enclosed, somewhere defensible. You used the landscape itself as a weapon. Caves were premium real estate, not because early humans had a particular fondness for damp stone walls and zero natural light, but because a cave is a space with only one entrance. You can put your back to the rock. You know exactly what direction the danger is coming from. It's basically the first security system, and it was remarkably effective. You couldn't swipe a key card to get in, but then again, leopards can't swipe key cards either. Groups slept together in these spaces, close enough to share body heat, close enough to hear each other breathe, close enough that if something came in the night, you'd know immediately. It wasn't cozy in the modern sense. But there was a particular kind of safety in numbers that went beyond just defense. Sleeping near other people meant someone was always a light sleeper. Someone always stirred. Someone was always, accidentally or deliberately, keeping a kind of watch. And then, somewhere around 400,000 years ago, everything changed. Fire. The moment early humans gained reliable control over fire, the entire dynamic of the night shifted. Fire does something almost magical from a survival perspective. It keeps you warm, yes. It lets you cook food, which dramatically improves nutrient absorption. But more importantly than any of that, it creates a boundary, a circle of light, a wall between you and the dark that is purely psychological in nature and yet somehow completely real. Most large predators won't cross into firelight, not because fire physically stops them, because they evolved to hunt in darkness, and an open fire is a disruption, an anomaly, a confusion. Sitting next to a fire, you were safer from predation not through strength or speed, but through light itself. But here's what's genuinely interesting, the thing that doesn't get talked about enough. Fire didn't just protect early humans from predators, it fundamentally transformed what human beings were. Think about what happens around a fire. You can't really be productive in the modern sense. You can't read. You can't write. You can't send passive-aggressive emails to your coworkers. What you can do is sit, look at each other, actually be present in the most complete sense of the phrase with the people around you. Researchers who study modern hunter-gatherer societies, groups like the Ju-Hoansi of the Kalahari Desert in southern Africa, or the Hadza of Tanzania, have found something remarkable. Daytime conversation in these communities is mostly practical. Who's hunting where? What needs to be gathered? Social coordination? Logistics? The ancient equivalent of a Monday morning briefing. But nighttime conversation, completely different. At night, around the fire, people tell stories. Long, elaborate, emotionally rich, morally layered stories. Stories about ancestors. Stories about the world's creation. Stories about what it means to be brave, to be generous, to be a person worth knowing. Roughly 80% of all nighttime campfire conversation in hunter-gatherer societies is storytelling, compared to only about 6% during the day. Read that again. During the day, logistics. During the night, stories. Every single evening, for tens of thousands of years, human beings sat around fires and narrated the world to each other. They were doing exactly what we still do on streaming platforms, what we do with novels, what we do with every film ever made. They were trying to make sense of existence through narrative, through characters and conflict and consequence. The campfire was the cinema. The storyteller was the screen. And this matters more than it might seem, because stories are how culture transmits itself. Stories are how values get passed down, how history survives, how identity is built across generations. Without writing, without books, without any external storage medium at all. Stories around the fire at night were the hard drive of human civilization. Fire didn't just save humans from predators, it may have been the single most important catalyst for the development of language, empathy, cultural memory, and complex social bonding in all of human evolutionary history. Sitting around a fire at night, telling each other stories, might be the reason we became the kind of creature that can imagine things that don't exist yet. Not bad for a bunch of people in animal skins. Now, about sleep, because this is where it gets genuinely strange, and this is the part that might actually change how you feel about waking up at 3 a.m. Most of us operate under the assumption that the natural, normal, healthy way to sleep is 8 hours, continuous, straight through the night, in one uninterrupted block. If you wake up at 3 a.m. and can't fall back asleep, you assume something is wrong. You start Googling symptoms. You spiral into a WebMD rabbit hole. By 4 a.m., you've diagnosed yourself with 3 separate disorders and a rare nutritional deficiency. Here's the thing. That assumption might be completely historically wrong. There's a historian named Roger Ekirch who spent decades going through thousands of historical documents, private diaries, medical texts, court records, literature, household accounts, and what he found was genuinely astonishing. For most of human history, going back at least to medieval times and almost certainly much further, people didn't sleep in one block. They slept in 2. It was called first sleep and second sleep. You'd go to bed a couple of hours after dark. You'd sleep for roughly 3 to 4 hours. Then you'd wake up naturally, not in a panic, not in distress, just wake up calmly, the way you might surface from a pleasant daydream. And you'd stay awake for an hour, sometimes 2. Then you'd drift back to sleep until morning. This isn't speculation or a fringe theory. It's documented across cultures, across continents, across centuries, with remarkable consistency. References to first sleep and second sleep appear in ancient texts going back to Homer's Odyssey. Roman authors wrote about it as a matter of fact, the way we'd mention breakfast. Medieval literature is saturated with it. A French physician in the 16th century actually recommended that couples conceive children during the waking period between sleeps, because people were naturally more relaxed and alert during that window. Medieval courts documented it. Household accounts mention tasks performed between the 2 sleeps as ordinary, unremarkable domestic events. The watch in the night. You've heard that phrase in old texts, in the Bible, in countless historical documents. We tend to assume it means guards on a wall keeping military watch. And sometimes it does. But very often it simply means the period between the 2 sleeps, when ordinary civilians were routinely awake in the dark. And what did people do during this waking window in the middle of the night? Everything. They prayed. In a lot of religious traditions, the quiet hours between midnight and dawn were considered the most sacred time for communication with the divine, when the world was still and the soul was closest to something greater. They thought about their dreams, which were taken much more seriously as information-bearing events than we take them today. They had sex. Apparently this was considered an excellent time for it, since the body was warm and relaxed, and there was nowhere else to be. They tended the fire, adding logs to keep the heat alive through the cold hours. Farmers checked on livestock. Mothers nursed infants. Some people in towns and cities actually visited neighbors. Not weird, nocturnal neighbor energy. Just people who knew each other moving through the dark streets between the 2 sleeps like it was perfectly normal, because it was. It wasn't insomnia. It wasn't a disorder. It wasn't a malfunction. It was just the night, doing what the night does, existing in phases, the way it always had. The reason this pattern collapsed is almost certainly artificial lighting. Once you can keep a space brightly lit, well into the late evening with gas lamps, then electric lights, you push your bedtime later and later. Your total sleep time compresses. The natural gap between first and second sleep disappears inside a single longer block. And suddenly, waking up in the middle of the night feels wrong, feels like something has gone wrong with you, rather than feeling like an ancient biological rhythm expressing itself exactly as intended. So if you've ever woken up at 3 a.m., felt completely calm and strangely clear-headed, laid there in the dark thinking about your life for an hour before drifting peacefully back to sleep, congratulations. You're not broken. You're not anxious. You're not developing a sleep disorder. You are, in the most literal sense, prehistoric. Your body remembered something it was never supposed to forget. Let's go further back still, because the deeper you go into how ancient humans actually slept, the more impressive it gets. Early Homo sapiens and our hominid predecessors before us didn't have beds, obviously, but they also didn't sleep the way we lazily imagine, just flopping down on bare rock and hoping for the best. The reality was considerably more sophisticated. Archaeological evidence from sites in South Africa, specifically Border Cave in KwaZulu-Natal, suggests that as far back as 200,000 years ago, humans were constructing deliberate sleeping platforms. Not furniture, but carefully assembled layers of vegetation, grasses, leaves, selected plant materials. And here's the detail that makes this remarkable. Beneath those layers, researchers found ash. Not accidental ash from nearby fires, but ash deliberately spread under the sleeping area. Why? Because ash repels insects, ticks, mites, fleas, the things that bite you while you sleep and make you miserable, and potentially transmit disease. Someone 200,000 years ago figured out that if you put a layer of ash under your bed, the bugs don't come. They were doing pest control before the concept of pest control existed. They were using chemistry before they knew what chemistry was. Think about that for a moment. Someone woke up itchy, looked at the ash from the fire, made a connection, tested it, confirmed it worked, and taught it to other people. That is science. That is the scientific method running in a prehistoric human brain applied to the problem of sleeping more comfortably. These weren't people barely surviving the night. These were people engineering their rest, solving problems with the resources they had, iterating on solutions, making life measurably better through systematic observation and innovation. In colder climates, prehistoric Europe, Central Asia during Ice Age winters, the challenge shifted from insects to cold. Temperatures in Ice Age Europe could drop to levels that would kill an unprotected person in hours. The response was communal sleeping. Groups pressed together, sharing body heat in a kind of living insulation system. This wasn't just social, it was thermal physics. More bodies in an enclosed space meant higher ambient temperature, meant survival. Certain individuals in a group were also natural lighter sleepers, more easily roused, quicker to alert. Researchers think this variation in sleep depth within groups may have been evolutionary. A group where everyone slept deeply would be a group that got eaten. A group with a range of sleep depths had, effectively, rotating sentinels, none of whom had to suffer the misery of deliberate night watch. Evolution is efficient like that. Now, here's the part that really puts it in perspective, because the night wasn't only about survival and sleep. For virtually every ancient culture on Earth, the night was the most spiritually charged time in the entire cycle of existence. And this makes a certain intuitive sense. The sun, the thing that made the world visible and warm and alive, died every evening. It went beneath the horizon. In the cosmology of countless ancient peoples, it literally descended into an underworld and had to fight its way back. Every sunrise was a victory. Every night was a vigil. The ancient Maya built entire calendar systems around the movements of celestial bodies that were only visible at night. Their cities, Chichen Itza, Uxmal, Palenque, were architecturally oriented to align with specific star positions and planetary movements. The observatory at Chichen Itza was designed to track Venus with extraordinary precision. Venus, which is only visible at dawn and dusk, was associated with Quetzalcoatl and governed decisions about war. The night sky wasn't decoration, it was a political and military intelligence system. Maya priests conducted specific rituals in the deep night hours, making offerings to ensure that the sun would complete its journey through the underworld and rise again. From our perspective, this seems like mythology. From their perspective, it was infrastructure maintenance. The sun kept rising. The rituals clearly worked. Correlation was causation, and the priests were essential workers. In ancient Mesopotamia, the civilizations of Sumer, Babylon, Assyria, a specialized class of scholar priests called Baru, dedicated themselves to reading the night sky for omens. Every unusual celestial event was a message. A comet meant something. A lunar eclipse meant something specific to the king. The behavior of planets told you when to go to war, when to plant, when to make treaties. These weren't superstitions in the pejorative sense. They were a serious attempt to find patterns in natural phenomena and use them to make better decisions. The methodology was wrong, but the instinct was pure science. The Polynesian navigators did something that, when you fully understand it, is almost impossible to believe. Without instruments of any kind, no compass, no sextant, no GPS, no charts, they navigated the largest ocean on Earth. They crossed thousands of miles of open Pacific in wooden outrigger canoes, finding tiny islands that represent pinpoints on an oceanic expanse larger than all the world's landmass combined. They did this primarily at night. They had memorized the rising and setting positions of hundreds of individual stars for different times of year, different seasons, different latitudes. They read ocean swells. Different ground swells come from different directions, and you can feel them with your body even when you can't see their origin. They tracked the behavior of birds, which fly toward land in the evening. They read cloud formations that tend to form over islands. They felt the temperature of the water with their hands and feet. The night sky was their navigation system, and it was more sophisticated in certain respects than anything we carried before GPS. These were people who had turned darkness into expertise, who had made the night into a library of information that they could read fluently. One more detail that tends to land hard when people hear it. Iron Age metalworkers in what is now Zimbabwe, working roughly between 200 CE and 1900 CE, deliberately chose to fire their forges at night. Not because of tradition, not arbitrarily, because during the day, ambient sunlight washes out the subtle color changes in hot metal that tell you its exact temperature. When you're working iron, color is everything. Red heat, orange heat, yellow, white, each stage meaning something precise about the metal's state and what you can do with it. At night, you could see those colors with perfect clarity against the dark. They were using darkness as a precision instrument. In ancient Pakistan, at Mohenjo-Daro, one of the first true urban civilizations over 4,000 years old, sanitation workers collected waste specifically at night. The city had a sophisticated drainage system, but the collection of night soil was handled in darkness, for obvious practical reasons involving quality of life for everyone else. They had logistics. They had scheduling. They had, functionally, night shifts. In Bronze Age Oman, farmers irrigated their crops at night to reduce evaporation loss. A remarkably intelligent water conservation strategy in a dry climate, arrived at through pure observational reasoning. In cold northern Europe, the Vikings used fish oil and whale fat lamps to light their longhouses during the long winter nights, which in Scandinavia can last 18 to 20 hours. They didn't surrender to the dark. They industrialized their light sources and kept working, kept socializing, kept living through the darkness. So let's bring all of this together because there's a real conclusion here, not just a collection of interesting facts. When we ask what ancient humans did at night, we imagine something small, something scared. People huddled on rocks, waiting passively for morning, enduring the dark rather than inhabiting it. Night as an absence, the gap between days, the time when nothing happened and nothing counted. But that's exactly backwards. The night was when humans told the stories that became culture, when they slept in two natural phases and woke in the middle to think, to pray, to connect, when they held each other warm against temperatures that would otherwise kill them, when priests read the sky for messages from the divine, when navigators crossed the Pacific using nothing but stars and swells and instinct, when metalworkers used darkness to see more clearly, when farmers irrigated crops by moonlight, when the Maya made offerings to bring the sun back from the underworld, and the sun, every single morning, kept its end of the bargain. The night was not empty. The night was full. It was a different world, governed by different rules, requiring different skills, yielding different kinds of meaning, but it was a world that human beings had mapped and mastered and made their own over hundreds of thousands of years. And we traded most of that away for electric light, which, to be clear, was absolutely worth it. Running water, antibiotics, the internet, cheese in convenient slices, the modern world has real advantages. But there's something genuinely lost in how completely we've collapsed the distinction between day and night, how thoroughly we've defeated the dark, how little most of us now know about the sky above our heads or the natural rhythms of our own bodies when left to their own devices. The campfire circle, the shared stories in the dark, the biphasic sleep with its strange, clear-headed middle hours, the stars as a map, as a calendar, as a sacred text, the waking in the deep middle of the night with nothing to do but exist. So next time you wake up at 3 a.m. and lie there, inexplicably alert, thoughts moving clearly through your mind like water, don't panic. Don't reach for your phone. Don't start the anxiety spiral. Just lie there in the dark for a little while. Think whatever you need to think. Be awake the way your ancestors were awake. Quietly. Completely. In the middle of the night that has always been yours. You're not malfunctioning. You're remembering.